Welcome to the Pod Like a Girl podcast with your host, Mia Findlay. This podcast is all about exploring and celebrating women's stories, voices, and experiences through bold and unapologetic conversations. Welcome back, everyone. It has been a minute since we've been on this podcast, and there are so many reasons for that, which are actually going to be featured in upcoming episodes. Some of them personal, some things that I have been dealing with over the last 6 months, and I'm starting to gain some clarity around. You might have seen me sharing on TikTok in particular that I'm currently going down the path of being assessed for autism and ADHD. And that's one of the reasons, has been how I am very good at putting projects in front of me. And then I have all of these walls that I run into, many of them cognitive, which make it really difficult for me to execute them. And these are things I've wondered about myself for a long time, whether or not this diagnosis, this dual diagnosis, applies to me. My instinct has always told me yes, and I was correct. And moving down the coast has been so important because I moved down here to be able to do some of these projects that I'm so passionate about. My life online is incredibly busy. My business keeps me very busy. It can be very chaotic online for me. And I created this sort of peaceful personal life and day-to-day life and brought all of my patterns with me. So it's been such an important key time to observe myself and to get the support I need to explore where these patterns come from. And it's been really emotional. It's been incredibly freeing and relieving. And I'm still kind of in the thick of it, but I have some incredible guests lined up across all different kinds of topics, but this one as well, talking about the fact that it is not anomalous that women later in life, I'm 37, and for the first time I'm exploring this, will find that that is when they're able to get a diagnosis. Because like so many things we talk about in the medical and psychiatric world, the diagnostic criteria and assessment criteria for autism, ADHD, neurodivergence in general was built around boys and men. So many of us have been missed in that process. And that's not what today's episode is about, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of brief context as to where I've been and why I'm back, in large part just because I love our community. And this was one of my favorite ways to connect with you all in these longer form discussions, conversations, whether it's a solo episode or it's talking to amazing women, amazing advocates out there, and covering the topics in more depth that are so important to us and show up in those shorter form spaces. So today we're going to be talking about decentering men, one of my favorite topics, because I think that we hear this term a lot. And we hear it particularly in feminist spaces, online discourse. It's kind of like a throwaway term. But what I find has been missing from the discussion for me are the specifics around why we do this, how we do this, what is the purpose of doing this, what might be the incentive for doing this for you. And I also asked you on Instagram and TikTok for some of your own personal experiences with decentering men, why you do it, how you've done it, how it actually shows up in your life, what's the impact of it in your life. And as usual, you came up with some incredible answers. One of the things that prompted me to do this was I made a TikTok yesterday responding to a trainer who is a man who was giving some advice to women throughout pregnancy in terms of how they should be training and how they should be quote unquote healthy in order to bounce back. That is one of the clearest ways I have personally decentered men, is for many years choosing not to take advice from men, particularly in areas which they don't personally experience or which they don't share enough context as women do to be able to give advice which is relevant. I think this can be true of financial advice. I think this can be true of self-care advice. I think this can be true of managing time advice, because so often men are able to do those things in a very different way because so much of the mental and physical labor at home is being done by women. So their financial advice is often silently excluding the fact that they have the support of somebody who is doing a hell of a lot of unpaid labor. And I just started doing that by default years ago because it just wouldn't connect. I'd be watching a podcast or listening to an audiobook or reading a book that was advice-based or expertise-based, and I would just be like, something's not clicking. this just isn't connecting. It feels like it's surface level. It feels like it doesn't hit anything in any way that feels actionable for me or relevant to me. And that just seems like the most obvious thing I should have realized. But then through the lens of decentering men, it makes all the sense in the world, right? I'm not going to go into a massive disclaimer about I don't hate men, because if you do, you are entitled to that. But also, I'm so sick of having to justify these conversations by first giving all the disclaimers about not hating men and this isn't an attack and it's not. But we don't need to do that to be able to have these conversations and to be able to have discussions for women and as women which benefit us, right? Which acknowledge the absolute truths of what our patriarchal world robs from us, or having to first justify why we feel the way we do. I'm just so incredibly tired of that, and I've never done it, and I'm not going to start now. But before we get into this, I do need a little bit of a costume change, because the reason decentering men has been on my mind is because these babies are available today. It is my first idea that I've had where I've gone, I need to make that into a t-shirt. There have been so many things that I have shown you guys or discussed with you guys where you're like, Mia, put it on a t-shirt. And I'm like, I don't know. That this came to me and I was like, this is the whole point. This is the whole point of what I'm trying to discuss with women, trying to inspire in women, is centering yourself in your life. So these puppies are available right now. They are available in the black with the white lettering. There is also the white with the black lettering and center me. When this came to me, I sat bolt upright and I was like, how do I do this? How do I make these? And then even though these are I'm so proud of them and I think that they're just so the core of my message, this then came to me. I got onto a creative role, and the reason I'm so proud of myself, guys, is because I have no visual creativity. You're probably looking at these being like, I mean, yeah, but the concept isn't exactly high art. I have no visual creativity. Then when I came up with this, I have been living in these t-shirts for the last 2 weeks. Also because they are so comfortable. They're 100% cotton. They're boyfriend tee style t-shirts. So they're longer in fit and they're roomy. So this one is an XL. This one is a large. I also have it in a medium. And the medium I will wear with jeans and tie up like this. So there's plenty of fabric to tie up and it looks unbelievably cute. With jeans over leggings, I have I think an XL of one of them that I wear to bed, and they're small through to 5XL. Size inclusivity with my background is obviously incredibly important, and wanted to make them accessible for everyone as much as I could. But yeah, this one I am obsessed with, absolutely obsessed with. And my best friend Josie helped me out with it. She did a bit of the lettering, she did the leaves and the stalks, and she added the little finger paint. She made our little fingernail purple. Just looks so vibrant and alive in person. So absolutely obsessed. Also, 5% of the profits from this drop are going to be going to one of my favorite charities, What Were You Wearing? You guys know how much I love what they do. We've had Sarah on the podcast before, and I just want to keep supporting them because what they've been able to achieve in the time that they have been doing the work they've been doing within women's safety and men's violence, I just want to continue to support them because we need them and they're just doing the most amazing work. So head to the link down below. They are available today at 5 o'clock. So this should be up when they're available. So very, very important little addition to my wardrobe for this episode. Getting into what decentering men is all about, like if we zoom out and we look at what decentering men is as a concept, I think very often we can narrow this down to sort of the romantic relationship, heteronormative kind of sense of decentering men, which is absolutely valid. It can be not focusing your entire life or even large portions of your attention or focus on things like dating or even being in a relationship. I think sometimes women who are in partnership with men can hear this as, oh, you just don't have men in your life. And so there's some kind of exclusion there if you are somebody who has a partner who is a man, or if you have close male friends or family members, etc. That is absolutely not the case. It is how much of your sense of self, your identity, your choices, your features of your life which are important to you, whether that's career or education or even your outlets and hobbies, your friendships, how much of that is in service of those relationships, or how much are those things sacrificed for that relationship. But it doesn't mean that you're not dating. It doesn't mean that you're celibate, although for some women it is. That is part of the definition of decentering men for them. We can see that rise in women talking about celibacy. I know Julia Fox talks about it a lot, that she's been celibate by choice for a couple of years because she just doesn't see any other option. But there is sort of more of that movement, and it's just one portion of decentering is in that relationship department, because there are women like myself who are queer, who, for me, one of the ways that I've decentered men is that even though I consider myself bisexual, I don't date men. I haven't dated men for many years. And then there's this macro sense of decentering men, right? Which is so intrinsic to how we're all conditioned in the patriarchal world we live in, right? Like, it doesn't just relate to how you interact with men on a day-to-day basis. It's the ways in which you navigate your life and navigate, most importantly, your relationship with yourself and what takes up your brain space in terms of how much do you center male validation with how you move through the world. How much of that is in part prioritizing validation from men, being obedient, being seen as good and nice, not being seen as too much. I mean, that sense of too muchness I hear about all the time from women in my community. I had a young woman ask me on a live recently on TikTok, do you ever become self-conscious, or has it affected your self-esteem being somebody who is loud and opinionated and political? And I said to her, it has not affected my self-esteem because it's such a contributor to my self-esteem. And I think it's also a reflection of the fact that I have done the work to decenter men, whereby it can make me feel alone. It can make me feel lonely at times when I find myself in rooms or in interactions where that isn't appreciated, or it's somebody attempts to diminish it, usually a man. And decentering men can feel lonely. If you're not surrounded particularly by other women who are doing this work or who have done this work, it can be really daunting because it's so multi-layered. It isn't just about how we talk about men at brunch, a la Sex and the City. I mean, Miranda had one decentering men moment where she was like, we're smarter than this. And again, like, that's also just conditioning. It's not whether you're smart or not smart. It's sometimes about awareness, and it's about personal choice too, whether you want to even go on this journey. It's how we show up at work. It's how we interact with our employers, with our colleagues. It's about not wanting to rock the boat or be seen as shrill or angry or disagreeable. And I think the most important place I learned this, and where my true deconstruction and decentering started, was with my recovery, was peeling back the layers of diet culture, which is just patriarchy's greatest lieutenant, and how I had diminished myself, or how my eating disorder had diminished me. But yeah, how my self-talk and my view of myself and my value had been diminished down to how I was not just perceived by others, but certainly perceived by men. How I was seen as good, how I was seen as somebody who was agreeable. I talk about it often on my other podcast, Beyond Body. One of the biggest impacts of my eating disorder was it turned me into a Stepford wife. I had no personality, I had no opinion, I had no sense of self, I had no authentic energy coming out of me, because I just wanted to be as agreeable as possible, as inoffensive as possible. Can you even imagine a world where that version of me exists? I just wanted to be beige. I wanted to be able to be projected upon whatever was going to keep me safe, because ultimately, this is why this is not a conversation centered around judging whether somebody is interested in going through the process of decentering or not. There's no judgment here, because so much of why we center men and so much of why we prioritize their validation and their approval is safety. Of course it is not generally safe to not go with the status quo. Safety is belonging. Safety is you tick the boxes, you do the conventional things, you toe the line, you behave the way that you're supposed to, you follow those gender norms rigidly and strictly, and you will be safe. And safe is to be approved of. It is to be accepted, not physically safe, emotionally safe, mentally safe, logistically safe, right? Like there's so many threats that patriarchy is running on this undercurrent of, right? That's the energy that fuels it, is this series of unspoken threats. And one of them is rejection. One of them is exile. And as humans, as animals, we are not safe if we are in exile, if we don't belong. And so it's so beautiful to see women speaking so openly about this next layer of what it is to be a feminist, what it is to be a woman in 2025 in a mainstream sense, right? It's kind of like, from my vantage point of talking about eating disorders and recovery and diet culture for 12 years, some of the language, even like the term diet culture, a lot of people had no idea what people like me on the internet were banging on about 12 years ago. And it's the same thing with terms like decentering men. It doesn't have to be as lonely or as risky if we are having the conversation together and if we are seeing examples of it in other women. And that it is so freeing, right? Examples which buck the stereotype which the patriarchy wants us to believe about feminism, about women being child-free, right? The cat lady with nobody around who is miserable and unfulfilled. And you go out and speak to women who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s who are child-free, particularly I think the important stipulation often being child-free by choice. And that is just not what their lives look like. That is just not their experience. And it's the same thing with this principle, that if you decenter men, that you are running the risk of missing out, being left behind, not belonging, not being safe. And we're just seeing this completely different viewpoint because women are sharing the true experiences of what it is to decenter men, and we see their success and we see their independence and we see their adventures and we see their friendships and we see, you know, the layers, the textured layers of what is possible when you have all the options on the table, including if you choose to decenter men. It's part of what I'm trying to do. I'm very grateful for my life. I am very grateful for my autonomy and my independence and my freedom. And they're just all words for freedom, really. I'm a classic Sagittarian. It's very important to me. But I want to be part of that demonstration of, I don't care what choice you make. I just want you to make the informed one that is meant for you. I want you to have all the options on the table. So yeah, decentering men is just essentially not living your life in reaction to men. It's not living your life making choices around their responses, their beliefs, the conditioning that they're subscribing to as well, because we have to subscribe to that in order for their roles to make sense. These unspoken rules that we're all engaging in, which they benefit from far more than we do, which is why they're not decentering us. I think another really key element of how we consent to men is prioritizing and taking accountability for their emotions, for their behavior, for their actions. And this is kind of where the upholding of the patriarchy comes into it, and where these gray area conversations have to come in terms of how we talk about women who are aligned with the patriarchy, who maybe lean more conservative, who, whether it's on a personal level or on a political level, lean in a way which means that they are centering men pretty much on every single level, taking into account what we've already talked about in terms of how that has so much to do with safety, and why I won't ever come with the same energy towards a woman who is upholding patriarchy as I will towards a man, because for a woman it is inherently at the core about safety in terms of her motivators. And it can come across as pick-meism, and it can come across as, you know, being a gender trader and all that kind of stuff. But and sometimes the elements of it change if they're profiting from their position, or if they're actively responsible for changing legislation which affects women and removes their access to healthcare that they're entitled to. There's different layers and levels of energy that I'll bring to those interactions. But I think they are a core example of being responsible for men's behavior, their feelings, etc. It's a lot of sort of victim blaming, right? That we have these conversations about whether or not it's a crime that's taken place, and the question being, well, what did she do to him? Well, what happened just before this happened? Well, she should have seen it coming. Well, she should have picked better, which is centering men as this sort of protected class, even when their behavior is objectively abhorrent, even when it's objectively criminal. There is still, including from women, a knee-jerk reaction of, well, we have to make it the woman's fault. We have to put the blame there because that challenges the status quo, that men are a protected class. They are protected from even their own behavior. And we can see women certainly employing some of those attitudes as well. And that is a huge way that women are centering men. And it is complicated. It's complicated, but I think needs to be called out and should be done responsibly. I think there are some really overt signs that we're centering men and some really subtle ones. One that I notice is when I observe women who are really vocal amongst women. They're really outspoken, they're really opinionated. But then when you observe them around men, they're much more falling into kind of like the people pleaser role. They're much more dulled around the edges of where they're really sharp and really on it with women, right? Where they're really astute and they're really opinionated and they're really outspoken. That will kind of fall away in the presence of men or in interactions with men. I think we can often see this in workplace situations where amongst women there's a totally different display of their personality and their capacity and their intelligence and their observations. And then in a meeting or in a room with men, it will be a completely different presentation. It will be sort of more deference. It will be someone who is more quietly spoken. It will be somebody who maybe encourages behavior by laughing or affirming that they've shared with you they really abhor or really don't look positively upon, right? And I've certainly in my time in corporate, which has been a long time since I've been in a corporate setting, that was always a fascinating kind of dance that I watched take place, watching how the women in my circles at work then showed up when men entered the room. And it is, again, that kind of dulling of yourself and that performance of yourself almost when you're centering men. And it's so bizarre when you're inside of it, because I know that certainly in my early to mid 20s, when I was in those corporate settings, I could kind of feel myself playing like this incredibly reduced version of myself, knowing I was doing it, and knowing I was doing it because I was engaging with a man. But I would shift gears almost instinctively. And again, it's not until you become aware of this stuff that you can change it. Can't change what you don't acknowledge, can't acknowledge what you're not aware of. But there was kind of an awareness because I could feel myself shift in and out of that energy, and very often didn't like myself for it, right? Kind of judged myself for it because I grew up with a dad who was a feminist, who I could be my most loud, abrasive, opinionated self with, but I would appease and I would giggle and laugh at things I did not find funny, that sometimes I morally thought was pretty gross. And I would walk away just feeling so dysregulated within myself, right? I think that can be a real indicator that you're performing and that you're putting on an act and that you're masking, because you walk away feeling so dysregulated and like your energy is off. I think that's certainly something to pay attention to if you're a woman dating men, is, does this person leave me feeling dysregulated? Is the way that I show up making me feel dysregulated? That can be a real indicator that we might be centering men in this way. So yeah, doing things like minimizing yourself to be liked, minimizing your intelligence, your humor, I think is one of the things to go when you're centering men and you're amongst men, because of some of those untruths and stereotypes, like the women aren't funny. Find me a funny male comedian at the moment other than Caleb Heron. Find me someone in the Joe Rogan sphere who's funny. Or if you can find one, find me one that hasn't been Me Too'd. But also, things like feeling anxious, not just how you shop in relationships, but if you are somebody who dates men, feeling anxious when you're not in a relationship, feeling anxious when you're not on the receiving end of that direct male attention. Maybe you're playing into narratives in your head about your worth or your timelines or what's going to happen to you, or just some really rigid expectations you have of yourself and your life and your potential, and that it's not kind of a broad landscape of things that you're thinking about for yourself or considering for yourself or exploring for yourself. I mean, I haven't experienced this in terms of my relationships with men because I don't have them. But when I decided to be child-free by choice, I was on such a narrow track moving towards that outcome that I really didn't want. And then as soon as I told myself, maybe you don't want to have kids, the whole sky appeared. Like this ceiling just flew off and the whole sky appeared, and all of the options for what could happen in my life appeared in front of me. And I felt so free, and I felt so like I could breathe. And that's how I feel about having decentered men from my life as well. I feel like I can breathe. I feel like I am truly behind the steering wheel of my life, like my life car. I am truly the captain of my own ship. And again, that doesn't mean that I don't rely on people, that I don't have friendships with men. I think for a lot of women, considering the idea of decentering men can feel like a loss. It feels like a giving up of something. And again, it isn't, because it's not the minusing of men from your life if that is your choice. It's expansive. And if there's anything I have learned during the most important phases of my life, which have usually been the most difficult, whether it's eating disorder recovery or going through a lot of loss in a short period of time and doing trauma work and building the projects I have and trying and failing and trying and failing and trying again, it is that the goal is always to live expansively. It is never to end up in boxes. It is never to end up on rigid tracks. And it's about seeking out where you can be yourself the most. And so I think that that's what happens. It's putting it into perspective. It's not removing something. It's just taking something which our patriarchal structures teach us is normal, which is like that men's place in our lives and their input and their opinions and their influence on our decisions, it becomes outsized by patriarchy, because it has to do the trick of telling us that that is like oxygen, right? Without it, we're not going to be okay, because if we discover that it's maybe fumes and not oxygen, we might go seeking out the oxygen. So it's about expanding. It's about putting more stuff on the table. It's about finding meaning in things that actually give you meaning and bring you meaning, and not just relying on the default of what you're told should be meaningful, right? Like that is what social conditioning does to us. It tells you this is meaningful to you, this is important to you, and then having to do the deeper work and the deconstruction and the unpacking makes you go, does that actually mean anything to me? Like, is that important to me? Like for me, was controlling my body actually important to me? Was everyone thinking that I was XYZ and approving of my body and approving of how I showed up in the world, was that actually important to me? I mean, if you look at how I behave on social media, you can probably guess my true value system, which is no. People disagree with me all the time. A lot of people hate what I do on social media. I don't care. I'm expressing my value system. I'm expressing who I am as a person. It's the ability to kind of like bring everything down to its foundation, whether it's centering men or it's diet culture or it's these other things that are just conditioned into us, and just bring it down to its foundation. And then if you want to pick it up and choose it again and reconstruct it, you can, but you're now making a choice. You're not just inheriting something the world gave you and went, this is supposed to be important to you. Centering men is a foundational thing which reflects who you are and your value system. No, you get to unpack that, and then you can pack it back up. You can reconstruct it again and go, no, this is important to me. This is central to who I am and my value system and how I want to show up in the world. No judgment. But I want people to make choices that are informed and aren't just based on their conditioning, are actually based on, is centering men something that fulfills me, that makes my life feel expansive, which makes me feel hopeful and connected. And I think there's a reason why so many women are discovering that it doesn't. And again, that doesn't mean exiling men out of your life. It means taking the meaning of decentering men, which has become outsized by patriarchy, and putting it back into perspective. I think another huge benefit is how you experience your interactions and your friendships and relationships with women. I mean, I'm personally so grateful for the decentering I did, because as somebody who's queer, who's bisexual, it just helped me to properly forensically look at how I felt in relationships with men versus how I feel in relationships with women. And it is night and day in terms of how fulfilling, how calming, how centering, how rewarding, how calming, loving. It just feels like night and day to me. And that has been one of the greatest gifts of decentering men, is it's helped me to also explore my sexuality and how I want my life to be and how I want my relationships to be in a really fulsome, important way that was going to have a huge impact on my life if I didn't spend that time reflecting. Now, I've always been somebody who highly, highly, highly values my friendships with women. I have lifelong friendships. I'm very, very lucky. Friendships, 30 plus years, 20 plus years, and collect, amazing women along the way who I'm so grateful to have in my life. I don't know that I would have reached the depth with them if I hadn't decentered men, and if they also hadn't decentered men. To be friends with somebody who is heavily male-centered is really tricky. It's really tough. They might be the friends who disappear when they get into a relationship with a man. They might be the friends who you watch their energy switch up when a man comes into your atmosphere. And so you kind of lose your friend in a way, in increments, right? And that can be really tough. And that's up to each of us to kind of navigate that and balance that, and how we kind of navigate our relationships when there's that element. I'm maybe too blunt for dynamics like that. Or I'll just be like, we're smarter than this. I don't want to talk about this anymore. But don't get me wrong. Like, love a bit of relationship goss, and we'll celebrate my friends and what's important to them. But at some point, like, let's broaden the topics. Some of these things come back to freedom, right? Like not having to perform anymore. Even though there might be anxiety about dropping the mask and not performing, there's so much anxiety that comes with performing this role that isn't truly who you are. And I don't miss that at all. Like some of those examples I gave of, particularly at work, performing this version of myself, this more agreeable, giggly, sort of stupid, like I would really dull my intelligence. And in a way that made life easier, but it made it much harder to sort of sit with myself, and it was exhausting. So not having to perform, and people just know, like my mum knows, if you want me around your mates who are like in their 50s and 60s, and some of them have viewpoints that I'm not going to shut up about, she's like, maybe don't come into this drinks thing. Because I'm not going to perform. I am not going to. It's not part of my ethos. It's part of the deconstructing from centering men. Because I think if we had to summarize what centering men can do to us, it's like self-abandonment, right? It's all the things I've described, so many of the things that you've shared with me in terms of your experiences of the impacts and consequences of centering men. It's self-abandonment. It's not being your true self with yourself, let alone with other people. It's exhausting. It's depleting. It's giving away something that isn't given back in return when we look at the amount of the mental load and the labor load which women carry, this unequal exchange of energy and output and love and care and focus. So self-abandonment in any form is something I think we all need to be on the lookout for, because there's so many versions of it, and centering men is just one. You not being the main character of your own life. Like, don't get me wrong, main character energy can be a real issue, but you should be the main character of your own life. I saw a TikTok the other day, and this comes up often, of women saying things like, it's so painful when you realize nobody prioritizes you. And I'm like, well, what about you? What about you? Instead of waiting for permission, which is so much of what centering men is, and decentering men is no longer asking for permission. And that at the core, no longer asking for or waiting for permission to prioritize yourself. It will never happen. The system is set up in such a way that it is too beneficial for you to never center yourself or prioritize yourself. You are a resource, even if that's subconsciously done, where somebody exploits you as a resource. You are still being used as a resource. The message needs to be sent that you don't need anyone else to prioritize you, because you prioritize you, and they can fall in line or not, but that's never going to change, right? So I think that's one of the first checklists in terms of how to practically implement decentering. Am I prioritizing myself? Am I prioritizing performance? Am I prioritizing being chosen? Am I prioritizing somebody else's comfortability over my own in terms of how I show up in this moment, how I show up in this relationship, how I show up in this workplace environment? Am I prioritizing that performance and how other people feel about how I show up versus how it feels to be me and how I show up? And in summary, I think that's why it irritates me. Just to go back to the top of how I opened this video, this is my chair, by the way, that makes these noises, and now it's not going to do it because I want it to do it. There we go. I think this is why it frustrates me that very often we'll see these conversations open with things like, it's not about hating men. It's not about, because ultimately that's centering men, right? That we have to open these conversations, which are mostly being consumed by women. The men aren't here being like, where's my disclaimer? Like, that's why it frustrates me, because it is ultimately about you. It's about a return to yourself. It's about an exploration of yourself, an understanding of yourself. It's about undoing to rebuild what you want to be part of your house that you're building, in terms of your identity, in terms of your priorities, in terms of your passions, your interests, whatever it might be. It's about choice. It's about informed decisions with what you're going to do with your one precious go on this planet. Centering yourself is such a huge part of my philosophy and what I want to continue to talk about, because yes, obviously I will always be passionate about talking about women's safety, men's violence, etc. But I think that men's inability to move on those things, to catch up and evolve in time, has spurred on these much more expansive, exciting, inspirational elements of, well, if that doesn't happen, a lot of women who otherwise wouldn't have ever considered decentering men are coming to the conversation, because the alternative just isn't that appealing. So some of the things you shared with me about how you have gone about decentering men out of your life. Just going to pop over to the old platforms before we wrap up today. Love this one. I have stopped automatically catering to non-verbal cues like sighing or grunts or any noise or action that indicates discomfort. E.g., if my husband feels hot, then sighs and flaps his shirt, I no longer run and adjust the aircon to make him more comfortable. He can figure that out himself. Love that, and so relate to that as somebody who from childhood has always fallen into the caretaker, caregiver role. That brings up discomfort, right? That tension of wanting to go and fix it, wanting to provide the solution, not wanting other people to be uncomfortable because we can pick up on their discomfort, and that makes us uncomfortable. Such an important learned new way to behave, to not automatically respond to that signal. Love this one. One of the ways I've been thinking about it lately, because I've done a bunch of that decentering work already, is what people sometimes talk about with food. Don't focus on removing things, but on adding. Just keep adding women to your life, professionals, authors, social media followers. The quality and value shines through, which makes it easy to shift your focus. I hope the reference to food isn't problematic. Not at all. It's a great comparison, because that's kind of woven into this episode a little bit. We don't take away, we add, we crowd out, right? Finding women's voices that you resonate with, who feel like lighthouses, who feel like they, resonate with some of your experiences, and who, light something up in you, whether it's inspiration or it's humor or it's their intelligence or it's direct advice about things, whether it's financial advice, etc. Any of those things that I need advice and guidance on, it's all women in my feed. It's women on my bookshelf. It's women in my audiobooks and my podcast playlists, because they don't just have the expertise, they have the context. Love this one because I do this too. I stopped moving for them. Absolutely. I'm almost 6 foot tall, so I've got a little bit of a cheat here because I can be quite imposing depending on somebody's height. But I stopped moving for them as well on sidewalks, on pathways, when I'm exactly where I'm meant to be with pathway etiquette or, shopping aisle etiquette, and not getting out of the way, just like kind of playing a game of chicken with them. Putting on my best RBF, resting bitch face, and just plowing forward. Another great one. As a 54-year-old woman, I realized when I needed expert advice, my bias was to seek out a man. That's how I was raised, and I even went so far as to discredit advice from some very knowledgeable women. Love this. See, it's the honesty. I just love it. I realized this was learned behavior and only I could change it, so I consciously make sure when I needed advice, I'm seeking out the best person to help me on that topic. Gender doesn't come into it, although I'm finding more and more it's women. Absolutely. I mean, this is not to say don't seek out the best person for the job, but do we have biases about what that means? Like Tina is so generously sharing that she did have those biases. She did behave in a way that she now wouldn't. And would we select a man as an expert or for the job because he's a man? Would we be discounting women as an option? This year, I've been focusing on socializing and improving my friendships with women. I've listened to Platonic on Audible by Marissa G. Franco, PhD, and she explains how close relationships between women greatly benefits our mental health and physical health much more than our relationships with our husbands and boyfriends. That is what the research says. It is why I am constantly talking about my friends. I am constantly championing, friendships with women. I have done an episode with my best friend Josie on Beyond Body, but would you like me to do an episode here with Josie? Let me know. But yes, the research shows that women not only gain more for their physical, mental, emotional health, but they have better outcomes overall, and also say that they value those relationships more than even like their long-term relationships with men or marriages with men, which, sorry guys. This one from Diggy. I started by consciously trying to unmask, center, be genuinely myself, which then automatically decentered men. It does. Because they're like, well, this isn't the conditioned behavior we're used to. I don't do things I'm not interested in, dress for others, laugh at things I don't find funny, downplay my skills, humor pathetic nonsense with a fake smile. There are so many things I was doing every single day that had been conditioned in my behavior to appease those around me. So reflective of so much of what we've talked about. Amazing. I stopped lowering my standards to find one and decided to have a baby by myself using donor sperm. Best decision ever. You absolute powerhouse queen. I love that. Love that. So there were so many more, but I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time we talk about decentering men, especially now that we have a uniform. So like I said at the top of the episode, these are available right now at the link below. It'll be the link at the top of the description box wherever you're listening to this or watching this. There's also going to be free shipping if you buy 2 t-shirts. And all of the t-shirts are $40 AUD. And I have factored that into the shipping because with the company I've gone with, they're really reliable. It comes by Ozpost. I've chosen this company in particular because I tested out a bunch of others and ethically wasn't aligned with them. But this is the very best option that I could go with. So have sort of reduced the cost of the t-shirts. The fulfillment center is up in Queensland, so it's all local. So you've got your Resistorhood tee. This is my favorite. But then I put this on and I'm just like, it just says everything. And then we've got our white with the black and the purple. So thank you so much for supporting. It means everything. I'm so stoked that we can also support What Were You Wearing, a charity which means so much to me. And I will see you in the next episode. So stoked to be back. See you guys soon. Bye.